Hey, fellow babies, welcome back to Pachter Factor on SIFTD.net. If you are a Patreon patron, we appreciate your patronage. You're getting this stuff the instant it is published. If you have taken the time to link your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch Prime account, then you are getting this real time. Please remember to renew that linkage in the show description below. If you're subscribing via YouTube, thank you very much. All these things keep Shane eating macaroni and cheese so he can try to recover his health, and he's doing fine. We'll figure it out one of these days. Today's question from Sifted from ZN Trip. EA recently outbid Take-Two to acquire Codemasters for $1.2 billion. Is Take-Two in a position to compete with other publishers for these types of strategic acquisitions? Do you think it was smart to spend that much on a developer that only creates driving games? The genre has kind of faded over the past decade. It's a bunch of questions there. Look, I think the EA acquisition makes sense because EA has been in racing for a long time. Back in the day, they made Formula One and NASCAR every year. Back in the day, Burnout and Need for Speed were bigger brands, so they did a pretty good job. They have real racing on mobile. They bought it, but they've had it for a good 6-7 years. So I think buying the studio that took over the Formula One license and buying the studio that makes better looking racing games than Burnout and Need for Speed was pretty smart, especially because that studio happens to be located in London, and Criterion, who makes Burnout, is located in London. So I actually think it's smart. You're going to combine the studios. You're going to put the Codemasters guys in charge of all the brands. And I think you're going to use the best artists and probably across the different brands, use the same driving mechanic, sound, the whole shading so that the cars look real. So I actually think it's going to improve all the racing games from both studios. And then EA's got a lot more money than Codemasters. So, probably instead of making a Burnout every 3 years and a Need for Speed every 3 years, you're going to get, Burnout, Need for Speed, Dirt, Grid, Formula One, and Project Cars every 3 years, which means 2 a year. So you're going to get a lot more racing games, and possibly more frequently. Possibly you bid on NASCAR, and far more important, I think you make a mobile game that works, and you got a lot of brands. So mobile's not giant, but CSR Racing is around 100 million from Zynga, so there's room. 100 million for a mobile game from EA. That would be instantly their most successful mobile game prior to the Glue acquisition. So I think this acquisition makes sense. The price tag, 1.2 billion. It's like just for Codemasters making 150 million of revenue a year and 30 million of profit, vastly overpaid. Buying it strategically because the Codemasters team can enhance the EA racing portfolio, put EA back on track to generate a lot more revenue. They're going to do 300 million a year from this. So it's going to end up being something really worthwhile, and say up from 100 million a year. So they're going to add a couple 100 million right away instead of 150, and they're going to probably get a mobile game better. So literally maybe go to 400 million a year from currently 100. That's totally worth it. So I think that they bought it because I think they have the vision that Codemasters can actually add a lot of value to them. Don't worry about the genre. The demand for every genre is pretty constant. It's just that the rest of the world has grown bigger, so in comparison to combat, shooter games or battle royale games, sure, the genre's faded, but the genre's not shrinking. It's still quite large. As far as Take-Two, are they in a position to compete? Take-Two has something like $3 billion of cash. So they're absolutely in a position to compete. And to be fair to Take-Two, I think their management's pretty prudent. They have not made a big acquisition yet. I think the biggest thing they bought was like 2 dots, for a couple $100 million. I mean, they literally have bought a handful of mobile developers for a couple $100 million here and a couple $100 million there. They bought whatever Sid Meier's studio is, the Civilization studio. That was inexpensive. They bought Ken Levine's studio back in the day, probably $100 million. So I think Take-Two just tends to do prudent inexpensive acquisitions that have a lot of synergy and make them quite comfortable that they can actually grow the brands or grow the franchise. And I'm okay with that. Like, I personally would rather see them make an intelligent small acquisition than swing for the fences and spend $1 billion. And I'm not sure that Codemasters was a strategic buy for them. They don't have a racing genre. They have Midnight Club, and they haven't made it since 2009. So, maybe they were going to buy Codemasters and reinvigorate Midnight Club, but the truth is they don't have any revenue from racing. And so it really was just expanding their portfolio into racing. And I'm not sure they had the same level of synergy that EA did. So that's why they did not bid EA. Can they? Like I said, they have about $3 billion. They could spend $3 billion anytime they feel like it. They didn't feel like it. So, is one of them a drunken sailor out on leave and spending money and not knowing what he's buying, and the other one an accountant who's making sure that he gets value for every penny he spends? Well, I'd say that what EA did was a good strategic decision, but it looks to some like they were drunken sailors. I think what Take-Two did was prudent, good stewardship of somebody else's money. Remember, the company's owned by its shareholders, not by the management. So I think that both companies are doing the right thing. I think that EA outbid Take-Two because they saw a strategic fit, and Take-Two didn't pay more because they didn't see as big a strategic fit. And Take-Two will buy something. You didn't ask about Glue. Maybe that's a question later. But, EA buying Glue, boy, you could have bought the key assets in Glue for the same price Glue bought them, which was Design, Home, and Covet Fashion, for 10% of what you paid for Glue if you were in the market back when Glue bought them a few years ago. So, you let them buy something and then turn it into great games. Covet Fashion, Design, Home are great games, and then paid up to buy them. So I think that, EA's biz dev guy should have been in the market back when Glue was in the market. And I laugh about that because Zynga bought this company called Small Giant. They make empires and puzzles. And I remember talking to the Jam City CEO, and he said that Small Giant showed the game to him before it launched, and he offered them $25 million for the studio, and they wanted 50, and he said no. And then Zynga bought them for, I can't remember, something like $700 million a year later. And it's turned out it's a great studio, and the game's doing $500 million a year, and Zynga's getting massive positive return on that investment. But, Chris said if he had paid, stepped up and paid 50 instead of 25, he would have that, vastly successful game. So you never know. So the Glue guys saw something in CrowdStar and Design, Home, and Covet Fashion, but that's the truth with all M&A. And so I'm not going to diss Take-Two. I actually think I would rather, as a shareholder, a company not purchase stuff that isn't a clear strategic fit. And I think they've been very, very prudent. Fellow babies, thanks for joining us on Pachter Factor on SIFTD.net. We appreciate your patronage through Patreon. We appreciate that you linked your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch Prime account. You can do both. We appreciate that you're subscribing on YouTube. Don't do all three. If you're Patreon patron, you don't have to pay on YouTube. But YouTube and Amazon Prime, absolutely, because that's free. And if you're just watching a week late because you're too lame, you better follow me on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter and you let me know that I guilted you into it, I will give you a shout out on Twitter. And at least 40,000 of our closest friends will congratulate you for your good judgment following me.